Tonight, to be honest. More than anything, I kind of want to just get to know you guys, and then we're not going to have like much conversation between you and I tonight. We're going to talk, but I actually just, if nothing else, wanted to get faces and names and start to learn who our current small group leaders are, who maybe our incoming small group leaders are. And if you were at church this morning, you heard me say that. How many of you are here because you heard me say at church this morning if you're interested in Yeah, a couple of you are here just because of what we said this morning. That's awesome. That's what we wanted. So I know we have a mixed bag tonight. We have some of you who are experienced small group leaders who have led for years. Some of you just started maybe in the last semester. Some of you are considering it for the first time. Some of you just maybe wanted to hear what a small group's about. So again, I don't have a lot of an agenda. More than anything, I want to talk from my heart to you guys about why I believe as your campus pastor it's important that we have small groups. Why do we do them? Why does Seacoast place such a high priority on them? And then you guys got a handout. I would ask you not to refer to it yet because it's much more compelling than me, and you'll get sucked into it. So you gotta, I would tell you to turn it over, but it is two-sided, and so that's not going to help you. But I shot myself in the foot there. But just I'm going to talk to you from my heart for a little bit, and then what we're going to do is we're going to go through this. And this is a great tool that I've used before in my time at Somerville to just talk about basically the essentials of leading a healthy group. And we'll go through that. But let me pray to start off, and then we'll kind of jump into talking. So, Father, thank you for tonight. Thank you for all these leaders, whether they're leading now in an official capacity as a small group leader, or whether they're thinking about it. Lord, we recognize that every one of us is a leader in some sort. And so, Father, I pray that tonight you would help us to become better leaders. I pray that you would help us to love you more because of tonight. I pray that you'd help us to desire to see our church know you better. Father, I pray that you would light a fire under us to be committed to discipleship, to be committed to the people that you've entrusted us with, to them knowing you in a deep, abiding way. And so, Father, help us tonight. Guide our conversations, guide our time together, guide my words, and we'll give you all the glory, Lord. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen. All right. Well, like I said, I want to talk to you, kind of broadly just about small groups and about Seacoast. And I've got during my time in Somerville, some of you know this, and probably most of you know this, that was actually my job in Somerville, was my primary task. Brad can testify to this. We all have secondary and tertiary and whatever you would call a quadrant task. We all have those. We all have those. But my primary task in Somerville was small groups. And so the first thing I would say is the small groups are very near and dear to my heart. Not just because of that. I took the job that I did in Somerville because small groups have been a huge part of my life, part of our marriage, just part of who I am. It's small groups have been the engine of discipleship for me, especially in Stephanie in my 11 years of marriage. So I'm passionate about small groups. When I look to the future of the Columbia campus, I want us to be known, and I'm not saying we are already, because maybe I just don't know well enough yet, but I want us to be known as a campus full of small groups that are pursuing the Lord, that are absolutely passionate about it, and I want us to lead the way in that. I want us in the next few years to have the highest percentage of connected people in small groups. I would love to see that every single person who calls Seacoast Columbia home would be in some sort of small group, and that's audacious and that's a big goal, but it's not actually an unreachable goal. And you guys get to be a part of that. So, just at the outset, I want to say thank you. Thank you to all of you who have led, who will lead. I really do believe that small group is the most important ministry that we have in the church. And this is going to, for all the Seacoast cameras and speakers listening or the microphones listening, they're not going to like this. But I think that small group is the most important ministry that Seacoast offers. Some of you know, Seacoast is since 29 years ago when Pastor Greg sat down and had that, he calls it this napkin meeting, right? When he sat down with Ron Hamilton and some others and they drew out the vision of Seacoast Church. From day one, Seacoast is meant to be a church for the unchurched. It's meant to be a church that reaches out to anybody and says, come as you are. Don't stay as you are, but come as you are and let the Lord change you. And what that means for us with discipleship, many of you have heard that term. As a church, we want to disciple our people. We want to lead them to become more like Christ. But what that means with Seacoast being a church that is for the unchurched is that on Sunday mornings, we don't quite get to do everything that we would want to do with our church. We don't get to do everything that we would want to do with our congregation. We don't get to do the very deep biblical sermons, exegetical type sermons. Not that some couldn't handle it, and some of us want that. But by the nature of the beast, we don't go super, super deep on Sunday mornings because a new person who's far from Jesus comes in and they just can't even make any sense of it if we go too deep on a Sunday morning. But what I want you to know is that from the very top, if Josh Surratt was sitting here, he would agree with this, that at the very top, it's not that we want people to stay that way. It's not that we don't want our congregation to know Jesus at a deep level, to study the scriptures at a deep level. We desperately want them to do that. And that happens in small groups. That's where it has to happen at Seacoast. Small groups are really our true, and I would dare to say only engine for discipleship at Seacoast. If discipleship's going to happen at Seacoast, it's probably going to happen in the context of small group, or it may happen as we rub off on each other one-on-one in a mentoring type relationship. And most of the time, those relationships blossom from small groups anyways. And so I say all that to say we value very much what you do. We value your role as small group leaders because you're getting to do, to be honest, what Brad and I wish we got to do. As a campus pastor, it's actually hard sometimes for me to wrap my head around the idea that I don't get to actually do as much ministry as I would like to. I know Brad feels that same thing, that, yeah, we get to be a figurehead on a Sunday and we get to lead things like this, but actual, in the trenches ministry is done by you all. Our job is to equip you to do ministry. And that's hard because I want to do it. I want to be the one leading small groups, and I probably will lead a small group, but you know what I'm saying. You guys are the ones that get to be the hands and feet of Jesus. You all really are on the front lines of small group ministry. And so I just can't stress enough to you how important that is to us and how much we desire that for you. My heart for small groups is very much a biblical or a biblically informed view. I believe that in the very beginning, if you go back to Genesis, and some of you, have any of you sat on Inside Track with me? If you have, you've heard me say this. Irene, you're gonna get bored here for a minute. She's heard me say it, but she was sleeping in Inside Track anyways. That's what Irene's so good.
I'm never bored.
I'm never bored. I go back. Some of you. I love the book of Genesis. The book of Genesis is one of my favorite books by a long shot. I have an incredible professor in seminary, and I had just a class on Genesis, and I feel like I learned so very much in that class. But one of the things that he would often tell me is that we as Christians can look to Genesis to see the paradigms of life. And that word paradigm. A paradigm is what sets the tone for everything else. And what I believe is that Genesis is the paradigm for community. If some of you remember this, in Genesis 2, when God has created everything and he rests, he looks down at Adam. And what does God say about Adam? Or what does he say when he looks at Adam's initial situation? Anybody remember?
Should not be alone.
It's not good that man should be alone. And he says, okay, I'm gonna do something about this. I'm gonna create somebody fit for him. Now, some people just instantly translate that as man and wife, and that's a good thing. And I think that's a good way to understand that. In Genesis 2, yeah, it is talking about man and wife. I believe that that's kind of God ordaining the institution of marriage between a man and a woman. I absolutely believe that. But I think if we stop there, if we stop with that traditional view of man and wife there, I think we're missing a whole bunch of what God has for us there. Because it doesn't say it's not good that he doesn't have a woman. It doesn't say it's not good that he doesn't have a wife. It just says it's not good that he's alone. And I believe that's why community is important. I believe that from the very get-go, God looked down in a perfect world, mind you. Everything was perfect then, right? Sin had not yet entered the world, and God still said something's not good. And that's that Adam was all alone. And I believe that for us, that's no different. Some of you can testify to how lonely life has been. When you've gone through seasons where you've been alone, at least kind of felt alone, kind of on your own island, not doing life with somebody else. And so I believe that Genesis and then all throughout Scripture teaches us the importance of community. It really is. I won't say it's in every book, but if you look through the Old Testament and the New Testament, we see the importance of surrounding ourselves with other people who are pursuing Christ. I believe it's why we're called the body of Christ. It's because, a body cannot function without all its parts, right? A body's no good. I guess you can function. If I had no legs, I could function, but I wouldn't quite be the same. And so, I believe as a body, we're meant to pursue God together. And I want y'all to get that and to hold on to that because community can be very difficult. Being in small group and leading small groups can be very difficult, and it can be frustrating. I can't tell you the amount of times that after a small group, Stephanie and I throughout much of our marriage, have led small groups. And even the most recent one that we had in Somerville, we led a married couples group. I can't tell you how many times that we've had small group in and we just wanted to slam our head against the wall, or we would just sit there and cry together because things didn't go well, or somebody poured something out that was really heavy and we didn't know what to do with it. It's messy. Like, community is messy. Think about your family. How many of you have a messy family from time to time? My word, I can testify to a messy family. Thankfully, like, Stephanie and I have kids, not so bad, but boy, oh boy, like, I'm not going to go into we would have a counseling session for me if I wanted to talk about my childhood growing up. I mean, families get messy, and I tell people that all the time, that a small group's no different, because I believe that a small group ideally will turn into a family. It will turn into people who trust each other and love each other and walk with each other on a daily basis. And when that happens, when you get that close with somebody, you're going to butt heads. You're going to fight. Things are going to go ugly. And that's why I bring up what I believe Scripture teaches us, because I think that's what we have to hold on to when those times come. We have to remember that this is it's not just something that Seacoast is asking you to do. It's not just something that's fun to do to build community. It's what God has basically, He's ordained this for our lives, that we would have people to do life with, that we'd have people to encourage us to pursue Jesus with. And again, if you get nothing else tonight, I want you to get that above all else, is that we believe that community is important because God says it's important, because He has shown us the best way to do this. And the best way to do this life is to have other people to pursue Him with, because it's very difficult to try to go it alone. I can remember my time in the Navy, and some of you can relate to this. Many of you have been in the military. And when I was, my first deployment, when I was new to the ship, I remember getting there, and I worked in a department of roughly 200 guys, all nuclear engineers, many of them too smart for their own good. Very, very high percentage of them would consider themselves militant atheists. They may not say militant, but they were atheists. And I can remember that feeling of just being utterly alone. And in fact, when I first reported to the ship, I believe I was the only, in that department, I was the only believer, at least the only one who would self-identify as a believer. And those are the only guys you spent time with. There wasn't a Bible study on the ship that I could go to and find community with. And those were 6 dark months of my life, because I felt completely alone. And trying to go it alone, now don't get me wrong, it's not, we know that the Lord is sufficient. God is so sufficient. And God is so good to us in those times. But it's still very different, because it's still against His design, I believe, for us to try to do it alone. It's the same reason we tell people to come to church, because you're not meant to do it alone. But that applies for small groups. And so again, I want you to know that from the very top, if Josh was sitting here, he would tell you the same thing. If Greg was sitting here, he would tell you the same thing. Small groups are where it's at Seacoast. Small groups are absolutely integral to what we do. Small groups are where discipleship happens. It's where we want it to happen. And so I just wanted you to hear that tonight first, that as small group leaders, we value you and we want you to do this, and we need you to do this. We desperately do. You know, when I think about discipleship, and I'm ad-libbing a little bit here because I'm having things brought to my mind, but if you think about discipleship, I think about Jesus and His disciples. And Jesus modeled what discipleship looks like for us, right? Jesus got a group of 12 men together, and He personally invested in them. That's really at the heart of what discipleship is a one-on-one type of investment, a rubbing off on each other. And that's our goal. It really is. For our groups, our goal is that we would get in that kind of relationship with our people, with the people that God has entrusted us to where we can, as Jesus did with His disciples, rub off on them and teach them and pursue the Lord together. And so that's my heart to you tonight. I just want you to hear, as your campus pastor, that I will always stand right next to you as far as small groups go. And I'm committing to you tonight, and I want you to hear this publicly, I'm committing to you tonight to try to lead the way on that. I know Brad is a champion for small groups, and Brad does an incredible job with small groups. And everybody else within Seacoast will tell you that. Everybody else within Seacoast knows that Brad is an example to look to in small group leadership. But Brad knows as well as I do that it's not enough for Brad to love small groups, and it's not enough for Brad to lead the way. As your campus pastor, I have to lead the way. I have to model and believe and live out the importance of small groups. And so I do want you all to know that I'm not all talk on that. We're going to lead. Stephanie and I will lead small groups here, and we will actively participate in small groups because it is that important to us. Stephanie and my marriage I'm not saying it's going to falter without small groups, but it won't be the same without us being in a small group. I need the Bryces and Marquitas of this world to rub off on me and to rub off on my marriage. And I believe that you all know that. I'm sure that you know personally that you need that. But you also know that the 300 adults that come on any given Sunday in there need that desperately too. And we have to be proactive about doing that. And that's what we're doing tonight, because we're proactive. We're going to go after people. This fall, we're going to go after people. We're going to make sure that we do everything in our power to invite every single person that comes and joins us on a Sunday to be a part of what God's doing in small groups. So I want you to hear that. But then, I don't want to just leave it there. I want to talk to you because some of you, how many of you are just considering leading a small group for the first time? A few of you, right? Okay, yeah, several of you, which is fantastic. New small group leaders are kind of like, that's kind of my love language is new small group leaders. I love it. There are other love languages, just so you know. My love language is gifts. And so if you, that's actually true. I hate to, those of you who have gone through the 5 love languages, how many of you are the gifts? Yeah, I don't even like to admit that publicly because you feel so terrible. You're like, yeah, who doesn't like gifts? My wife doesn't really, actually. She lets me give them, but this is what I do. I go on little spider webs. They say women like the spider web or the top. I like the spider web. I just go off on tangents. You're going to learn that. You're going to learn that. I see. I don't even know how I possibly got onto the love language of gifts. It's crazy. All that to say, bring me gifts on a weekly basis. And I will stay your campus pastor for a long time. I got Jeff to shake his head in disgust. That was my only goal for the evening was to see Jeff just give up on me. No, what I want to do, this is you all should have this handout. This is a great handout. Some of you are going to see this and you're going to think, this is awfully basic. And yes, it is. This is kind of like the core building blocks of what I believe would make a healthy small group. And what I want to do tonight is just to go through them. Some of you, it does say, down at the bottom it says North Point Ministries. If you're familiar with North Point, that's Andy Stanley and his team. They're out of, Alpharetta, Georgia, which I think is a suburb of Atlanta. For many years, North Point has kind of led the way in small group ministry. They're an enormous organization. And when I say enormous, I mean enormous. Much bigger than Seacoast. And percentage-wise, North Point has an unbelievable amount of their adult population engaged in small groups, which is kind of unheard of for a mega church. At Seacoast, which we're certainly a mega church, we do very well to get 60 to 70% of our adult congregation into a small group, and they're consistently in the 80 to 90% of their, and that's in the tens and tens of thousands. And so I say all that to say that's where this comes from. They lead the way in small group ministry. They always have. They probably always will, God willing for them. And so I've used this. I love this tool. I meant to have these laminated for you tonight, but I don't know where the laminator in the church is. And I just, we can get them laminated for you is what I'm going to tell you. Because I actually would like to have them laminated so that every month or so, what I'm going to encourage you to do is, as a small group leader, I want you to every month sit down, and if you're a couple leading a small group, or if you're a single, whoever it is, sit down and go through it every month and just be real. Give yourself a real assessment and say, where am I at? There's questions at the bottom of each heading here. And they're just for you to self-reflect and say, how am I doing in this area? And so, again, I would love to laminate them because I want you to even be able to, every month, write some notes on there with a dry erase marker. And then at the end of the month, hopefully you can check it off and say, okay, let's go to the next. So get with Jordan. Jordan will laminate all of them for you. That's terrible. Okay. It is in her office. So Jordan will actually laminate all of them. She loves you guys so much that she will do it in her spare time. That's right. But these, again, they're basic. This is for most of you going to be something that you've probably heard many times before. But I'm often very reminded that sometimes, even in my faith, I think I was talking to Brad about this last week. In my faith, I tend to complicate things. I tend to get in my own way and to get in God's way with my head. And I tend to just complicate things. I make my faith hard. I make my marriage hard. I make my life hard because I just can't get out of the way. And many times, some of you know this, many times in life, we just need to go back to the basics of things. I think about if you read sports books, I used to be really into sports things, and not so much anymore. But I used to read that really the best coaches, even of professional teams, tend to always go back to the basics. They stress the basics of whatever they do. A professional baseball coach is going to stress the basics of how to field a ground ball and things like that. And I believe that for us as small group leaders or potential small group leaders, we would do very well to do the same thing. Just to stress the basics and continue to go back to the basics and say, how am I doing? Because if we're not doing well at the basic things, we're not going to do well at anything. And so tonight, at least I'm going to give you hopefully a baseline for how a healthy small group would look. And I believe there's 8 things. There's eight blue bubbles here. I think if you can evaluate yourself and do well in these eight blue areas, I think you'd have a very successful small group. It's not a recipe for it to be, because sometimes things just come up. Sometimes small groups don't gel as well as we would hope to. But I believe if you'll do these things well, I think you're going to have a healthy small group. So I just want to dive into it. The first thing, and it's in the middle, and it should be, the first thing you see is it talks about staying connected. And as you might guess, being in the middle, the idea here is to stay connected to the Lord. I'm not going to read these bullet points off to you. I'm going to kind of talk personally to you. The idea is one of my very favorite scriptures is John 15, where Jesus is talking about abiding in Him. And many of you are very familiar with that passage. Jesus just points out the necessity of walking faithfully with Him day by day by day. That apart from Him, we're not going to have anything. And in Him, we will have everything we need. We'll have all the spiritual nourishment we need. And that really is key. And you guys know this. As Christians, that's our greatest calling, is to abide in Him. As Christians, if you're not doing that, you're going to be suffering. And I know we can all attest to that. There's times in my life where I know I'm not abiding the way I should be, and I suffer because of it. And the thing to remember is that as a small group leader, or as a leader in general, staying connected to the Lord affects us, but it affects our groups as well. And it's absolutely key, because if we're not, as your campus pastor, if I'm not fostering my relationship with the Lord, it's going to affect our campus. It's going to affect our church. Because if I'm not staying connected to the vine, then I'm not being fed, and it's very difficult, if not possible, for me to feed the church. Not that I'm the one doing all the feeding, certainly not. But you understand the principle. As we abide in Him and as we stay on the vine, we're hearing from Him regularly. He's regularly encouraging us. We're seeking Him in prayer regularly, and that's gonna carry over into our small group. I know some of you probably your personal testimony of coming to Christ is through somebody who was just faithful in their walk with Jesus. You saw somebody who was faithful. That's exactly what it was for me. I had wandered so far from the Lord as a young man, and it took me having a couple guys who were not weird, somebody who faithfully walked with Jesus. You saw that their life was better because of it, and you wanted that. And that's the case with our small groups. I believe that this really is the central component of a healthy small group, is we walk faithfully with Him. We seek Him. We seek Him in prayer daily. We seek Him through His scriptures. We seek Him through mentoring relationships in our own life, and then we pour out into the people in our small groups. There's a Hebrew imagery. Some of it, and I'm going to forget the name of it. But there was the Hebrew culture was very big into water and things like that. They like to use a lot of water imagery. In the Hebrew culture, they would teach that leaders basically always had to have a full cup. They would always have to have a full cup, and they would have to be constantly leading themselves so that their cup was overflowing. It wouldn't even be enough for them to have a full cup. They had to be constantly seeking the Lord and getting people to speak into their life so that their cup was overflowing down to those that they were leading. I was actually listening to a podcast this morning. I listened to some leadership podcasts on my drives up from Somerville. It's been very good, actually. And I believe it was Andy Stanley, who is coincidentally the pastor of North Point, who was talking, and this is not his quote, and this is not verbatim, because I didn't have time before this to go back and find that sentence in the podcast. But he was talking about a great leader once said that the truest measure of a great leader is how well they lead themselves. And that's basically what this boils down to, is to be a great small group leader, you have to lead yourself well. You have to stay connected to the vine. You have to be walking faithfully with the Lord. Because if you're not, you're just not going to be giving your group what they need, and you're not going to be getting what you need as well. And so, again, at the end of each one of these headings, there's a question, and I'm going to read each one aloud. It says, are you staying rooted in your relationship with Jesus Christ, realizing that apart from him, you can do nothing? And that sounds drastic, but those are his words. Apart from me, you can do nothing. Some of you are very smart, super intelligent, super charismatic, can carry on a conversation about anything with anyone, but I promise you to have a spiritual impact in your group. If you're not doing this well, you're not going to get it done. We cannot carry ourselves through this one. It's not something we can do. And so that's the first thing, the main thing, is you stay connected to the vine. You stay connected to Jesus, and that's it. The second thing, and this, we're going to move from the top right, and we're going to go clockwise, and it talks about cultivating relationships. You've heard it said many times at Seacoast that small groups are about two things. It's about community, and it's about pursuing our relationship with Jesus. And the cultivating relationships piece is how we build community. I've said it many, many times, and this is so, it's Somerville. Some of you know Somerville is a much larger campus than Columbia is. It's, on a given weekend, Somerville has, between 1,300 and 1,400 people in the building. We have about 400. So, they're roughly 3 times the size of us. And I used to say this all the time there, but it rings every bit as true here. I used to say that Seacoast is a big enough church that if you wanted to, you could come in, week out, and never be known or know anybody. You could never be fully known or know anybody. And this church is plenty big enough for that to happen too. Make no mistake about that. It's funny. It's funny to me when I think about Columbia. I'll just be transparent with you here. When I came to Columbia, it was almost, not a culture shock. I don't know what you would call it. Maybe it's a culture shock to see that it was, when you've grown accustomed to a much larger campus, it's different coming into something that's smaller. And at first, I kind of thought, oh, this is great. It's so much smaller. I bet there's just this built-in sense of community. And there is somewhat, because we all foster that. Our church fosters that. But the reality is it's still a very large church. Compared to 90% of the other churches in America, this is a very big church. We're much larger than the average church in America. And what I know that means is that without intentionality, people won't know anybody here. It's definitely that big. The only person they may ever get to quote unquote know would be the greeter that they see week in and week out. But I bet you that greeter, I've seen this. We have some great greeters who actually learn names. But that's not enough. Y'all know that's not enough. But there are people in our church that are coming in and they actually kind of just want that. They want to stay in their bubble. They don't want that to be disrupted. They want to come in, get served, and walk out. And I understand that, but that's not what we want for them. That's not what I want for any one of you. I think it's a tragedy when people come into our church. This is going to blow your mind. I met a woman in Somerville one time in the inside track. It was actually in the inside track, and I would always ask. I would say, "How many of you been here for less than a month?" And this woman, I said, "How many have been here more than a year?" And she was the only one with her hand still up. And I said, "How long have you been here?" Just out of curiosity. And she said, "I've been at the Somerville campus for 12 years." And I said, "Okay." And now, see, I didn't know where. I said, "Oh, you just hadn't been through the inside track yet." She said, "Well, when that morning I had done some of the platform announcements, at least in the first 2 services, because we do inside track and then the 3rd service." And she said, "Well, when I heard you say, if you don't know anybody at Seacoast, inside track is for you, I knew I better come because I don't know a soul here." And I thought, you've been here for 12 years. And she was being absolutely legitimate. She didn't know a darn person. She could tell you. She even said, "Well, I know the one greeter with the glasses, and and he says hi to me every week." But she didn't know a person. And I thought, that's an absolute tragedy. That's not church. That's not the body of Christ. That is not what we're going for. That's terrible. And what I know is that can actually happen here. That can happen at Seacoast without us being intentional about it. People get lost. People can get lost in the fray. They'll never know anybody. They'll never have anybody to lean on when life gets hard. They will never have anybody to pray with. They'll never have anybody to encourage them to go deeper in their faith. And so we have to be very intentional about it. And again, you know this. That's why we do small groups, because we're passionate about cultivating relationship. Relationship is where we grow more in love with Jesus. We rub off on each other. And so the thing the one thing I would stress here, and I think there's another part where we talk about this. I may be wrong on this because it's been a year since I did this. But one of the big things I want to stress here is that when we cultivate relationships within a small group, that does happen during small group. It happens as we rub off on each other and as we interact with each other in small group. But I believe the truest measure of cultivating relationships in small group is, are you doing something together outside of just small group time? Now, as a small group, our last one, and really every small group we've ever been in, we've always met weekly. For Stephen and I, we've always said, we need a weekly small group. We kind of need that outside of Sunday, we need that every week challenge to keep going. But for us, even in meeting weekly, I don't think that's enough. I really believe that a small group, the healthiest measure of how good the relationships are in a small group is how much time do you spend with each other outside of a small group. If you I'm just going to use Bryce and Marquita as an example here. If Bryce, once a week came to Marquita and they had a good time. They had dinner and they said, I love you guys. You are my best friend, Marquita. I love you. You are the bee's knees, Marquita. But then for the rest of the week, if Bryce went away and really never talked to her or anything, would you say that Bryce is a very good husband?
No.
Clearly not. Now I know that's hyperbolic, right? That's hyperbolic because that's marriage. But you get where I'm going with this. A healthy small group is not defined by a night of the week or a night every other week. A healthy small group is defined by how well you're spending time with each other and by how much you're checking in on each other and how much you're loving each other throughout the weeks. That's what I envision for all of you. For all of you who are leading groups or who want to lead groups, I envision a family. I envision a family that connects with each other every day. Now, I'm not saying that's not my expectation of you. Don't get scared by that. Don't get scared that as a small group leader you have this super high bar of always connecting with your people. No, I believe that as you get close to them and as you love them, you're going to want to. You're going to want to check in. If I'm in a group with Bryce and I know Bryce has got something going on, I want to check in with Bryce because I care about him and I love him. And I want him to have somebody to talk to. And if nobody else, he's going to know that he can come to me and talk to me when things are bad. I want to have somebody when Stephanie and I get in a knockdown, drag-out fight, which we do. I want to know that I have a couple or other couples in my group that we can go to and we can say, can we just talk through what happened last night? We trust you guys. I just want to talk this thing through. You get what I'm saying? The idea is that it's not just that one night a week. The idea is that we interact as family and as best friends. I believe that some of my best friends in life are, and that I still consider best friends, are people that I've been in small groups with in the past. People from Charleston our first time, people from San Diego, people from Seattle, Washington, people from Chicago. These are all people that I still know would have my back and it would still be there for me in an instant if I asked them to be, because we were in small group together and because we actually became a family. And that's what the cultivating relationships is about. So that question to ask yourself every month I'm going to ask you to do is, how are you and your group members connecting outside of group time? So take a look at that and consistently evaluate yourself honestly on that. The next thing is that we promote participation. And this is a big one. Some of you may have guessed, I like to talk a lot. Irene talks a lot too. Don't let me fool you. Me and Irene are a bad duo. We can both talk your socks off, man. You get me going about anything that I'm passionate about. Like, you start talking Star Wars around me, and you're going to have an 8-hour conversation on your hands. I like it. I'm a talker. I'm just going to be honest with you that as a small group leader, this one's hard for me. And many of you who have led small groups would say this can be a tough one to promote participation. Some of you, even in this room, and it's okay, some of you are extreme introverts. You do not talk. Like you don't like to talk in front of people. You don't like to share things. God bless you. I feel bad for you extreme introverts. Because it's just rough. Although Irene told me about a resource today called the
quiet power of introversion.
The quiet power of introversion.
I'm married to an introvert.
It sounds like heresy to me. Is what it sounds like. There's no power in introvert. No, I'm just
There's a lot of power.
But there is. I know there is.
Because they think before they talk.
You are so right about that. I do not. I just let it out. I'm just a constant fountain of misinformation most of the time. But a healthy small group, and I tell people this all the time. An inside track, I like to tell folks that if they're interested in being a small group leader, Seacoast actually sets the bar pretty low. You all know that. You've all heard that before. I mean, it's not, I'm not even ashamed to say that. It's just the truth. We actually do set the bar low because we need small group leaders, and we believe that we can train them as they go, and we can get them to where they want to be. But I tell folks all the time that to be a good small group leader, you have to want to grow in your faith, and you have to want to pursue Jesus. That's number one. You have to want to care for the people in your group. Number two. And number three is you have to just be able to get a conversation started. But you may have the most dynamic conversation starter, and they'll still have crickets at their small group. And it can be crazy. Like, you'll ask the best question in the world. You'll sit down for like 8 hours before a small group. You'll come up with the best questions, and you'll ask them, and you'll just... We used to call it in the Navy the dithel, the deer in the headlights look. Like, they'll just be giving you the dithel, and you're like... And you're looking at it like, what is wrong with you guys? Why do you not talk? And it's hard. So let me say this. Promoting participation is hard in small group because if you have a group of introverts or you have a group of people that don't maybe necessarily trust each other yet, it can be very difficult to promote discussion. But there's some, I love this here because there's some ideas on how to promote participation. You'll see it talks about shared participation. That's a big thing. And this is something that you're going to hear more about in the coming months. I saw that Brad even put it on our forum tonight. But one thing that Seacoast is going to start in the coming years really focusing on is co-leading. For not like a husband and wife co-leading a group, but for really every group that's a Seacoast small group to be co-led, at least to have two defined leaders, and that's a big thing. And that's one of the best ways that we promote participation. I have seen introverts who will not say a dang thing during a small group. I've taken them aside and I've said, hey, how would you like to lead next week? And at first, you get that like, oh, no. But when they think about it, typically what would happen is I would say, well, you go home and pray about it. That's of course me being manipulative. That's manipulation, no doubt about it. But I also mean it. It's not like I'm just being manipulative saying pray and no, I believe I believe that God does call us to lead. And so I've invited the introverts in my group to lead a given group night, and I've seen them come alive. I've seen people who have never hardly said a word in group come alive and act like they're the greatest public speaker you ever seen. It's that quiet power of the introvert. Because they think deeply, and it's great. And that's one of the best things that we can do is to invite our group to co-facilitate the study. Sometimes you've heard this said. Some of you have probably done this. One of the things we like to encourage is somebody hosting a group while somebody else leads the group. Maybe that's you. Maybe some of you don't quite know for sure yet about leading a group, but you'd at least be willing to host the group, and that's a wonderful thing to do. Stephanie and I would always, we would consistently ask our group. Now we looked. Our home in Somerville was tailor-made for a small group. It was open concept, and it was wonderful, and it was great, and it was so good to have small groups at that. But that being said, we would always encourage a small group, hey, who wants to host next week? Because it's sharing the responsibilities, promoting participation, because they feel like they are taking ownership of the group when they do that. And that's just a big part of it. If we take ownership of any area of our life, we're going to pursue it more passionately. So it's partly just getting them to take ownership. You can do things like preparing the snack, leading prayer time, planning social. We're not going to read all those out, but look through those ideas to figure out how to promote participation within your group. And that's part of those cultivating relationships. As you're sharing those responsibilities, you're cultivating those relationships as well. So just ask yourself, how are you involving your group members in supporting the group? It's a big part of it. The next thing is serving together. Some of you are already doing that. Now, Brad and I'm still trying to get completely up to speed about, with me commuting, I'm not here nearly as much as I want to be. And so there's some areas that I know I still don't have a full grasp on what's going on. But so my understanding, though, is that there are actually small groups that are kind of at their core serving groups, right, Brad? And that's great. And so some of you have already got that figured out. You're already serving as a group. But any group, this goes for any group, and this goes for any person that calls Seacoast home. You've heard that said many times. I used to hear Pastor Greg, he said this when we went here, Stephanie and I went here from 2006 to 2008, and I feel like Greg would say it every week. He would say, if you call Seacoast your home church and you're not in a small group and you're not serving somewhere, then you missed the boat. You're not really a part of Seacoast. And I believe serving is not only important for us as individuals, but I believe it's important for a group. And I believe that for a couple of reasons. For one, I believe that we're all called to serve. We're called to be servants. Jesus, at his core, was a servant. Jesus was humble and served at every opportunity he could. And so, I mean, that's just our personal philosophy, is that we're all called to serve. But I love seeing small groups serve together because growth happens during service. When we serve, we grow together. I promise you that. It could be something as simple as, our small group in Somerville used to go to the church every few months, and we would pick weeds around the church, and we would, if new lines needed to be painted in the parking lot, we would do things like that. We would just serve, and it wasn't this great spiritual serving. It's not like we were going out and doing street evangelism or things like that. No, but we were serving together, we were having fun together, and we grew because of that. And it's kind of what I love about those kind of opportunities is there can be something about a small group. Now I say can, and I'll stress that because we don't want it to be this way. But there can be this idea that in a small group, people are going to act like they do in church. Now, do you know what I mean by that? People tend to put on a happy face at church, and people tend to put on a facade at church. And sometimes that happens in small group. Now, I believe that stops happening once you get close in a small group. People take the mask off and they become themselves. One of the things I love about serving together is you tend to see people without their mask on because they're not in a small group and they're not in the church. They're out just in a normal place and they're talking and they're joking and they're having fun. And I think that serving together is one of the best ways to actually just get to know each other. And so I think it's an absolute essential for a group. My goal for each one of you, my hope for each one of you would be that it doesn't have to be every week. Of course, if you do that, that's great. Some small groups I've seen in the past, there are groups that would serve in Kids Coast together. As an entire group, they would go and they would serve in Kids Coast together. Or they would serve as greeters for you. Yeah, Jordan loves that idea. She's like, we can do that. It's great. But it doesn't have to be a weekly thing. It doesn't even necessarily have to, I would love to see it happen at least as a monthly thing. And that's what I would encourage, is you to think about what's a monthly project. It could be something ongoing. It could be something different each month, but kind of at a base level, monthly, get out and do something as the hands and feet of Jesus. Go out and serve somewhere. Serve the church. Serve the local community. Katie, I know Katie would love to see some of y'all over there at that homeless ministry. That's right. That's right. And so serve. I mean that. Serve together. I promise you'll have fun. You'll get to know each other better. Your bonds will grow that much deeper. I think about it even like military service. Some of you who have been in the military know that even, I'm just going to use this term, I don't really mean it, but even with my heathen friends in the Navy, I had a great sense of camaraderie. Now, I didn't have a spiritual camaraderie with them, but I had an incredible sense of camaraderie. And typically when I meet other people who have been in the military, especially when I meet other guys who have been in the Navy, and especially when I meet guys who are nuclear engineers, there's this given camaraderie that never goes away. And why? Because we serve together. Now, it's different. I know we're serving our country. We're going into war. But there is just something about serving together, having a common purpose, a common goal, and meeting that goal. It builds you together. And so ask yourself, is service a consistent part of your group experience? If it's not, if you've been in a group and it hasn't been a part of it, there's no condemnation. It's okay. Just try to get better. Try to give yourself opportunities. Look for unique opportunities, fun opportunities to get involved, and it's going to be good. All right, we just got 4 more. We're almost there. Is it hot here, by the way? Yeah, I would say it's hot. Like, I'm sweating. I would take off my overshirt, but then you're going to see my sweat stains, and nobody wants to see that. Yep. I'm going to spare you that. Tonight. We don't want the fried chicken to come back up. The next thing, and I love this one. The next thing talks about celebrating change. And what change are we looking at? It's the essential that helps us stay focused on the purpose of the group. At its core, you heard us say this, that small group is about 2 things. It's about building community and it's about pursuing the Lord. And so as a small group, what I'm asking you all to do is to be looking for change in folks, to be looking for life change, to be looking for changes in people pursuing the Lord, to be looking for changes in people being in community together. I'll share a story from recently that as a small group, boy, did we celebrate. So some of you have heard, even a few weeks ago when Pastor Chip Judd preached, he talked about the power of Me Too moments in small group. He talked about how great it is in a small group setting where if I'm sitting and I'm talking with Bryce, or we're in small group and I share something, and I've been hesitant to share it, but I share it and I'm afraid to, and Bryce may sit there for a minute, but then Bryce says, you know what, me too, I'm dealing with that same thing. there's power in Me Too moments. And so this is probably about 3 months ago in our group in Somerville, there's a young guy named Cody. He's a young Navy guy. We had 3 young Navy couples in our group because we just feel like that's one of our callings is to invest in them. And so we had this young Navy couple, Cody and Bree, and we were talking about group, and I try, and I'm not great at it, but I try to lead by transparency. I try to lead through that. I try to be an open book. I don't want to put a mask on. Even as a pastor on Sunday mornings, I try not to do that. I don't want to ever act like I have it all figured out, like I don't struggle, like I don't sin. No, I try to make those things clear. And so there was a night in small group that we were talking about. The topic of the night was basically the idea of how God uses suffering to build us into who we are. He uses what we've gone through in our past to make us who we are. And I shared some things. I shared some things about my childhood. I shared, and I won't go into all this tonight, but I gave a very detailed look into my broken childhood and how that deeply affected me as an adult. And now I don't ever hide behind my broken childhood as a reason to sin, but I shared that part of the reason, I fell into some heavy addiction for several years. And I believe a big part of why I was addicted to what I was is because of what I had experienced as a little child. I was set up for failure by my father. Let's just say that. And I shared some of the things that I had struggled with for many years. And when I shared this, I told the group that night, I said, as much as I would like to say that I'm completely past that stage of my life, as much as I would like to say I've washed my hands 100% of it and have found total freedom, I said, I can't sit here in front of y'all and say that tonight. I can't sit here in front of you all tonight and say that it's not a daily battle where I have to wake up and put my armor on and say, not today, Satan. Like, it's not happening today. And I was transparent enough to say, and you know what? I'm ashamed to say it, but every once in a while I do it again. I fall into this thing, and it's not easy for any of us to admit those things, right? It's counterintuitive for us to admit that we sin, even if we all know we sin. Like, good grief, if there's a common thread of humanity, it's sin, right? We still want to hide our sin. Like, everything within us says, hide your sin, hide your sin, hide your sin. That's why the Bible says that it's freeing for us to confess. That's why we're called to confess. Is because it's counterintuitive for us to do so. So he has to say, confess. And so that night I confessed to them where I failed my wife and where I messed up. And I saw, I could tell what was going on. I saw Cody. He was kind of shifting in his seat. He was getting uncomfortable. And I basically knew what was happening. And Cody, who was an introvert, who had never really said much in group at all, Cody, started crying. And this is a big, burly, tough Navy guy. Cody started crying, and he, what's up? Oh, I thought he was pointing at me. Cody, this big, burly, tough Navy guy starts crying, and he said, I'm just so grateful you shared that, because I would have never thought you did, for one, and I'm struggling with that right now. And then his wife started crying, and she was crying because she thought that Cody would never tell another person in his life. She knew he had confessed to her how he had failed her, and she knew, and she wanted to be his support system. But Cody had never, by his own admission, had never told another soul what he dealt with, and he had never really told another soul other than his wife what had happened to him as a kid. And that night, he poured himself out. And this is a guy who didn't pour himself out. This is not a guy who talked openly about his feelings and about his emotions, about his sins. And I'm saying all this to say that's a change that we celebrated that night with Cody. We affirmed him and affirmed him and affirmed him. And then the next week we affirmed him. And we celebrated what we saw in Cody. Because something snapped in Cody. Something changed that night to where he saw that he didn't have to hide things. I don't think Cody had ever in his life seen that he didn't have to hide things. I don't think he had ever been in an environment where he felt safe enough to share what had happened to him, and where he felt safe enough to actually say, this is what I struggle with. And we celebrated that. I still call Cody and I check in on him and I say, and I tell him, I even go back to that night and I say, it was so good what you did. And I continue to encourage him to keep doing that. That's just one example. Some of you could talk a lot about this, but the idea is that you celebrate those things. You look out for them, and when you see them, you affirm them and you affirm them and you affirm them. You celebrate that stuff. I almost hate to say this because it's a cliche, but it's so true. Like, some of you are rabid sports fans, and you're Gamecock fans, or you're Tiger fans, or you're whatever. I used to be really into sports. It's just not, there's nothing wrong with it. It's not so much my thing anymore. But people get incredibly excited about sports. I mean, and you all know that. Like, people will. No, I'm a Cubs fan. When the Cubs won the World Series last year, I was traveling in Dallas. I was in a small group conference with Adam Martin, who you've seen before, and a couple other guys. And I was literally down on my knees in the hotel room, like praying / just very anxious, watching the final play. And when the Cubs got that final out, I literally did the bull dance up and down the hallway in the hotel, screaming like I was riding the bull all the way around. I got excited, right? And we all get excited about things. Like, it's good to be excited. What I'm saying is, get excited about the things that matter the most. Get excited about seeing people love Jesus more. Get excited about seeing people change. Be excited about seeing walls come down in people's lives. Be excited about that stuff, and I promise you that'll carry over to your group. Group leaders lead the way in celebrating those changes. And so you ask yourself, how do you and your group members celebrate the growth you see occurring in each other? Just continue to ask yourself, look out for those things, celebrate them when you see them, right? The next thing is that you provide care. This is a huge part of small group. It's providing care for each other. I could talk to you until midnight. I mean, far past that about how tangibly small groups have cared for me and my wife. I know. 4 minutes. That's right. I went a little over. I said 4.5. But for Stephanie and I, we have always been very far from family. We got married in 2006. Some of you heard me say that first, or when I preached my first sermon here, you heard me share our backstory. We got married April 21st of 2006. I left for boot camp April 24th of 2006. And so from very early on, we were not close to family. Moved to South Carolina. South Carolina was the closest we were ever to family during my time in the Navy. We went back to Illinois, where I was from when I went to school, went to undergrad and seminary and all that. And then we moved right back away from family. Not because we don't love family. It's just because it's what we feel God has called us to do. But for Stephanie and I, we have always been far from family, and we've needed small groups to care for us. Many of you are probably transplants. Now, I don't know about as much up here. When I used to talk to people down in the Charleston area, like 80% of people down there are transplants, because everybody's getting smart, moving from the north down to the south, because we don't have winters down here. Although I hear that we have winters in Columbia, and I'm going to curse it when it comes.
We don't have winter.
Okay, that's good. I hope that's true. People like to talk bad about Columbia. Charlestonians despise Columbia for some reason. And it's terrible, and they're mean about it. They're hateful towards you Columbianos, and that's just my term for you. That's right. She knows it. She's like, that's right, I'm judging all of you. But I'm going to be real with you. When I told people that you're coming to Columbia, you don't know how many times I heard this phrase, going to the armpit of South Carolina, huh? What's wrong with you? It's just terrible. People are just so terrible towards Columbia. But now I don't even know where I was going. See, this is what I'm talking about. This is tangent, right? I don't care, but I don't know how God it's a transplant. So down in Charleston, if I would ask that question to a group this size, roughly 80% would say, yeah, we're far from family. We're transplants. We don't live near our family. That may be the same case up here. I'm sure it's still more the case than in other places. And if that's too, you know exactly what I'm talking about here, is that when you're far from family, family is I believe, how God designed for us to be cared for, right? In 100 years ago, this wasn't an issue. Even 60 years ago, this wasn't an issue. 60 years ago, people didn't really move far from each other. Unless they were in the military, people weren't moving far from their families typically. They were staying together as a family unit. But in our modern world, that's not the case. I think for better or for worse, with how easy travel is and with how easy it is just to pick up and move, people tend to move, and people tend to not be so close to their families. And that's the case for many of you. That's the case for many, many, many of those sitting in our congregation, is that they're not near that built-in support network. And that is certainly where small group comes in. In all three of the birth of my children, I can say that small group played a big role. Some of you will hear this story much more in detail one day. I'll certainly preach on it one day, but our firstborn, Josiah, was born 1 month into a 9-month deployment of mine. I was not home when he was born. In fact, I was in Singapore when Josiah was born. They would not let me go back home. And small group stepped in and cared for my wife just as well as I ever could have. Now, no small group's going to meet the needs that a husband or a wife can, but as best as they could, they cared for my wife. They provided very, very tangible care. There wasn't a time that she had to worry about the lawn being mowed. There wasn't a time that those needs that I would even miss for Stephanie weren't being taken care of. And you'll see it talks about big ways and small ways. Those are big ways, right? That's a big story. Your husband's, how many times is a husband deployed from his wife when their firstborn's born? That's not a real common story. But it's not just the big ways, it's the small things. Again, it's the conversations that you providing spiritual care and guidance when they had a big fight. Somebody in your group comes to you and says, I don't know what to do with him right now. He makes me crazy. I want to leave him. We've had that in our small group. Bryce is the only one laughing.
Mutual friend.
That's right. That's the care. Care covers a huge span. But you heard me say that one of the prerequisites for leading a small group is that you want to care for your group. You want to care for people. That you care genuinely about people's well-being, both physical and spiritual and emotional. And that's what this is about. You see the quote there. Often people don't know how much you know, or don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And that's actually very true. A healthy small group is not necessarily one where you have the brilliant theologian, the seminarian who knows everything about the Bible. I would any day rather have somebody who's excellent at caring for their group and loving their group and checking in on their group than somebody who knows the Bible front to back, who can quote the entire dang thing. Please don't hear me wrong there. I'm not saying that's not important. I mean, I went to seminary. I think it's important. However, I would much rather have good care happening in a group even before that. And so all that to say, you make it a priority. Do you make it a priority for your group to support and to care for each other? We have to lead the way in that. We model that as small group leaders. We look out for it. We initiate it. We don't wait for them to come to us. We don't wait for the care opportunities to come to us. We're proactive. When we get together with our small groups, we ask, how can we care for you this week? What can we do? What do you have going on? Can we watch your kids soon? Can we do that? You're constantly and consistently asking those questions. You're being proactive. That's what that's about. Okay, we're almost there. 2 more. Replace yourself. This is a kind of tough one. I'm going to be honest with you. This is a tough one. It challenges us basically to prepare other people for leadership. Now, this is going to be a little easier when we do this whole co-leader push that we're going to be doing. But one of the marks of a healthy... They're giggling over here. I know. That's fine. That's fine.
I don't even want to say I hate it, but I feel bad moving away. I'm sorry.
It's a very poignant time for this to happen because they're about to replace themselves.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Okay.
I'm sorry. I'm terribly sarcastic. I learned that about me as time goes on. Again, a healthy small group leader, and this is just a leader in general. Like, part of what Jesus did with his disciples, he was preparing him. He was preparing to replace himself. Everything he did was intentional. He didn't have unintentional moments. He was getting ready for them to build the church, right? Everything he did was intentional toward that. And my thought is that Jesus did that, we would do very well to do the same thing. As small group leaders, we're looking at who in our group can replace us. We're looking at who in our group can lead with us. The reality is, it can be, we talked about the difficulties and the struggles sometimes of leading a small group. It can get to you. And there are going to be times in your life and in your ministry as a small group leader where you're going to need a sabbatical. Pastors need sabbaticals, right? There are times that you need to get away and you need to recharge, you need to get alone with God. I believe that's absolutely true for small group leaders as well. I believe that it will wear you down sometimes, and you will need a sabbatical from leading a group. And if you've not done a good job of having somebody up in your group ready to replace you, then your group's just is gonna die basically. And so, I would say if we care about our groups, we're going to do this. If we value other people in our group growing in their leadership, and if we value the group always being taken care of, we're going to raise up other leaders, and we're going to work to replace ourselves, knowing that there may be somebody behind us or beside us that could lead this group a whole lot better than I can. And I think that's something I have to always remind myself of, that there's always somebody else in my group who could lead this thing every bit as good, if not better, than I can. So I'm looking for those opportunities. Hey, come lead with me tonight. Hey, lead discussion tonight. Lead prayer tonight. Because one day you're going to be the one that's replacing me in this group. So you ask yourself, how are you intentionally investing in a potential leader in your group? And then this last one is it's aptly named. It's end well. A healthy group is a group that actually ends well. Now, some of you, now Brad can actually correct me if I'm wrong here, because this may be one of those things where I don't know the culture at Seacoast, Columbia as well yet. But I believe, Brad, if I'm right, that we do have long-standing groups, right? That we do have semesters at Columbia, but we're not saying, hey, at the end of the semester, you all got to disband and go get in a new group. So we have long-standing groups. Same thing in Somerville. We had groups that had been meeting for 10, 15 years, faithfully meeting together. But it's just, we all want to end well. In life, we all want to end well. In ministry, I desperately want to end well. It's not the norm for ministry to end well. It's not, not necessarily the norm for life to end well. It's not necessarily the norm for small groups to end well. Many small groups end in turmoil. Many small groups end because there was a fight within the small group that they didn't know how to navigate. And so basically, what I would say is, if you've done these other 7 things well, I actually think that ending well will come pretty easily. But the big encouragement here is to be prayerfully considering this at all times. Now, I'm of the mindset, I've never, there are churches out there that have defined semesters, and at the end of semesters, there are actually churches that say you should start in a different small group, in a new and different small group. I hate that idea. Because I say, if you're in a small group with people that you love, why would you want to break that up every 4 months? It's crazy. You can't even get to know somebody in 4 months. So I believe it's important to get into a long-term group. And I believe it's important to commit to that up front. To say, and as a small group leader, I'm asking you to consider that, to committing to these people for an indefinite amount of time. It isn't going to be the rest of your life, but in a way it is, because you're going to know those people and you're going to love them for the rest of your life. But the essential here is to be prayerfully always asking the Lord, where's my group at right now? And Lord, is there something else? Is there something else for the people in my group? Do you have something else for them? Or is this still the season for us to continue to lead this group and to continue to invest in the people in this group? I believe that every group, as it says here, does have a natural life cycle. We have a natural life cycle. Churches have a life cycle. That's why I say this one has to start and begin with prayer. Because you're not going to know otherwise. Well, it's not true. You may know otherwise, because you may just have a dysfunctional group that you're like, well, it's time to end this one. And that's easy. I've had those people. I'm just going to admit that. I've led a dysfunctional small group. It was probably mostly due to me. No, I don't necessarily mean that. But maybe if I was a better leader at the time, I would have helped with the dysfunction a little better. But groups do have a natural life cycle. I believe that. I believe that there are I think about my life, and I think about how God calls us to different seasons of things. You've heard me say this before, that we did not believe at all that we would only be in Somerville for 2 years. We thought that was basically permanent for us. We fully intended to put our roots down as deep as they could go there and stay. But God had other plans. God called us to something different, to something new. And I think that that's the case for small groups sometimes too. I think there are going to be times that if you're seeking the Lord in prayer, He's going to call you to disband a great small group, a group that's incredibly healthy. And you won't even necessarily understand why. And you'll probably say, no, this is too good. Why would we stop this? But if you believe that God is saying that, if you believe God's leading you to take a step of faith and to say, for the sake of my group, for the sake of their spiritual growth, I think we need to do a new thing. Then that's what we need to look at. And so, again, I think this one if you're writing anything down, I would write down, pray hard on this one, because you don't want to end a group before it's time to end a group, and you don't want to keep a group together longer than it needs to be. There is a healthy, there's a healthy way to end. And I would ask you all just to always be praying that, asking yourself, how am I planning today for a successful end to my group? And again, the nice thing is, I'm sure they designed it this way. I do believe if you've done those other 7 things well, then your group's going to end well. You're going to end on good terms. You're going to end with people that are your lifelong friends, that you love, that you cherish, that you always want to be a part of their lives. And that's really it. That's the 8 things I believe. If you'll commit to those things, again, it's not a guarantee. It's not a formula. It's not going to guarantee that you'll have a healthy small group, because things happen. But as best as we can do, if we can do those 4 things, or those 8 things, those basic things, you're probably going to have a good small group, or you're at least going to give yourself a chance to have a healthy small group.